today's demo session. We'll be starting with a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll get right into the Suma topics. For this demonstration and information session, we'll be using a Windchill 10.2 M30 system. We'll cover the definition of the Suma module, list some benefits that Suma provides for Windchill, and then I'll go over the key objects that are introduced in the Suma module. After talking about the objects, I'll cover just a few of the additional capabilities that are the commonly more useful capabilities that Suma supplies. And we'll also cover where the administrative components are for Suma. And then following that, we'll go over a quick demonstration of the key elements within the Suma module and show how that all works. After that, we'll leave some time to cover some Q&A. So a quick introduction, my name is Bob Sindelar. I've actually had experience with PTC products for about 7 years now. Particularly, my specialties cover PDM Link and the change in configuration management within PDM Link, specifically working with life cycles, workflows, the change objects, basically all the object types within PDM Link, and several of the modules as well, including Project Link, Parts Link, Suma, MPM Link, and a few other modules as well. Just a reminder for everybody on the meeting, all the participants will be on mute. So as we go through the demonstration and the information in this slide deck, I ask you to please type any questions you may have into the chat session. And at the end of the demonstration section, we'll go through the questions that are listed in the chat session and answer them as best as we can. So again, today's topic is Suma. So let's get into it. So what is Suma? Suma is the supplier management module with Windchill, and it's a seamlessly integrated module to PDM Link. This means that it doesn't appear as a separate application, but rather just gets added into the main PDM Link function with additional tabs in various locations and an additional administrative function as well in the side browser as well. Suma adds support to capture information about the suppliers for your OEM parts. Not only can you capture the information of the suppliers themselves, but you can also get the names of the suppliers, the part numbers that they provide, and you can also correlate these particular part numbers to your company's OEM parts. And there's a lot more functions that you have with them as well. The top benefits of Suma include enabling companies to integrate and manage the supply chain data within Windchill. What's nice about this is that not only can you track your supplier parts, but you bring in the information regarding your suppliers and their parts much earlier in the design process, and that information can be used by your design engineers and your engineering department to incorporate the supplier elements of those designs actually into your company's designs as well. So not only can you see the actual life cycle and creation of your own parts, but see where they come from in the instances that you actually purchase those parts rather than make them in-house. So here's a quick cheat sheet of the key items that are either introduced or impacted with an addition of the supplier management module. At the top we have what I'm calling the OEM part, and this is actually the regular standard PDM Link WT part. I'm just using a new term here to differentiate that from either of the two supplier type parts, which are the manufacturer part and the vendor part. The manufacturer part has the same sort of gear type icon as the OEM part, but has a dark gold color, and it gets associated to the manufacturer object type in Windchill as well, which is also a new object. There's also a sort of parallel set of objects called the vendor part, which also gets associated to a parallel object type called vendor. There's a new object type that comes in with Suma called supplier, and supplier has two soft types called vendors and manufacturers. And these are actually very similar soft types to other types of objects within Windchill, such as a WT part or any other typable object as well. There's also something called a sourcing context, which allows you to create an AML or an AVL for a set of conditions within Windchill. AML and AVL stand for Approved Manufacturer List and Approved Vendor List. And these are the key relational components that let you connect your manufacturer and vendor parts to your OEM parts. so that you can trace what objects you have and connect them to the actual objects that you purchase them from. There's also an object type called a sourcing rule, which lets you define sourcing contexts based on a governing body or rule within Windchill. Maybe this is a particular location, or maybe this is a particular context within Windchill that wherever you, if you ever have a supplier part that gets associated to a OEM part in a given library or product, you can have a sourcing rule identified to drive that particular sourcing context. You also have associated with your supplier a supplier contact and a supplier document function. And the supplier contact essentially functions as sort of a miniature principal, if you will, another person that you can supply information to further vet your supplier object. You could put in a key purchaser or agent from your supplier and put in their name and number and address kind of information as well to track that. And you can also associate regular WT documents to your supplier, which through a function known as the supplier document. And finally, there's an object called the part request, which is very similar in makeup to another Windchill change object, like a change request for a change notice. The part request is a lifecycle-driven object that creates a workflow that governs users through developing a new OEM part based off of a manufacturer or vendor part that is potentially going to be introduced to your company. Allows you to incorporate this manufacturer or vendor part, create your OEM part, associate to it, and then release that OEM part all through a very change configured control process. So let's go through the object types in a little bit more detail. First is the supplier type. As I had mentioned, there's actually two soft types that the supplier type contain, and this is where you would actually apply your objects or make business data. And those are a manufacturer and a vendor. These object types function like any other types in the type and attribute manager. They're actually fully soft typable and attributable as just like a WT part or a WT document would be as well. It's also lifecycle driven, so you can even control the acceptance or retirement of a vendor or a manufacturer within your company by initial vetting of the manufacturer vendor with some initial parts, identifying that they're good to go, or saying that they could be obsolete or canceled as a vendor or manufacturer as well. The main purpose of having the manufacturer vendor type is that they will be associated to your manufacturer vendor parts, and it's a required item for Suma functioning. As I had mentioned before, the suppliers, both manufacturer and vendor types, also have areas called supplier contacts and supplier documents. With supplier contact, you can make a new record to add sort of a light CRM tracking of key information regarding your key contacts at the company. And a supplier document is actually a link object type that will allow you to link an already existing WT document in your system to this supplier. So common uses of this could be making a supplier scorecard or creating key reports regarding the supplier's information, what they provide to you, any other reports, things like that, failures from the supplier. You can actually attach them here and create a more related information as well this way. The other new object that's mainly used with Suma is something known as supplier parts. Again, like the supplier object type, supplier parts also have two subtypes with them called manufacturer parts and vendor parts. And these are the objects that actually create business data within Windchill. Since the manufacturer and vendor parts are soft types of the WT part, it functions pretty much the same way that the WT part does. You can create additional attributes on the WT parts and pretty much do anything you do with regular WT parts to them as well. It does require, in order to create a manufacturer vendor part, you have to associate that to a supplier of the same type. So manufacturer parts have to be associated to a manufacturer and vendor parts to a vendor. What you can also do with these parts is that since they do function the same way as WT parts, any link or associative properties are also similar as well. So you can choose to continue to build your bombs with just using your OEM sort of gray gear WT parts, the standard parts, or you can actually build in manufacturer parts and vendor parts directly into the BOMs if it makes sense for you to do so. There's also a new object type that's more of an association rather than an official type, and these are the AMLs and AVLs, or approved manufacturer or vendor lists. These are the objects that establish associations between your supplier parts and your OEM parts. You actually have 3 different options you can do for any given OEM part. You can either track just the manufacturer information if you purchase this part directly from the manufacturer. You can actually track only the vendor information if the supplier you buy this part from actually just sells you the part but doesn't exactly manufacture it. Or you can decide to actually put together in one record both the vendor information that you buy the part from as well as the manufacturer that actually created the part to begin with. So you have all of those options there as well. The AML AVL information shows up as a new tab in the details page of the WT part, which you can see here. The source context object is the object that actually creates the home of where the AML or AVL exists. Typical concepts of a sourcing context would be to source objects based across maybe a geography. Maybe you want to have a Eastern Hemisphere or Western Hemisphere location, or European locations or Asian locations for particular purchasers, and you want to be able to source your objects accordingly. You can do that using a sourcing context. You can also set them apart by a product line or different types of manufacturers or vendors as well. Out of the box with Suma installed, you will get a default sourcing context list, which you will not see in the list here. It just exists in order for you to create AMLs and AVLs in general. There's also a sourcing rule, which, as I mentioned earlier, it allows you to take parts that meet a specific criteria, such as if there's a particular supplier or a sourcing context, and you can be able to source your objects based upon that sourcing rule. What we'll show in the demo is that an actual AML or AVL has an actual status of that sourcing, where you can say whether it's approved for purchase, or whether it's a preferred object for purchase, or whether it's actually not approved and you should not use it. Using the sourcing rules, you can actually set that in a sort of bulk fashion in many different ways. One of the other things you can also do, if you have PartsLink installed as well, is you can assign a classification node to work in conjunction with the sourcing rule, so that based on how the object is classified can also drive how you source the part. The other object that we had covered here is the part request object. As I had mentioned, this is also a new soft type or a new modeled type in Windchill, and it's very similar or analogous to the change request or change notice kind of object type. It has an associated lifecycle and workflow that guides the users through requesting creation of a new OEM part to represent supplier parts that have been created in the system. Like the change object, it's also fully configurable, so you can create additional attributes. You can modify the workflow routings as well to satisfy whatever procurement process you typically have at your company. And the out-of-the-box process is shown on the next slide here. For the sake of this demonstration, I won't be going through this full-on process as part of the demo, but essentially what happens is by creating the part request, you create a review task to submit the information that you're creating the request for. A component engineer would then take this information and either decide that more information is necessary or would go ahead and continue forward the actual vetting process of this new OEM part. Throughout the rest of the process, you'd be prompted to associate the CAD model and create an approved manufacturer list or approved vendor list where it's applicable to the associated manufacturer vendor parts as well. After adding this information, you also would go through a cost estimate and get that approved, decide if there's a single sourcing required for this object or if there's multiple sources, flesh out that AML and AVL list, optionally include a material composition declaration. And once all that's done, there's an approval step to say, yes, we can go ahead and create this OEM part and have it through the system, rework that loop, or go back to the research step. And once that is done, the new part actually goes through a complete release process and notification is sent out. And this is actually a high-level view of just the simple out-of-the-box method of what gets included within the workflow. So now that we've gone through the actual object types, I wanted to cover just a few of the additional capabilities that are pretty useful within Windchill with the Suma module. As you go through and start associating OEM parts to your manufacturer and vendor parts, you end up finding that there's a new method for searching for parts. Commonly in corporations, there's the knowledge, the tribal knowledge of the own parts you have in your company, or if you know what the supplier part number is, but sometimes you don't necessarily know that the two objects are the same object or represent the same object. Here, whether you know one or the other part, there's actually a very useful way to go take that information and use the AML-AVL function to find your OEM part as well. So if you know the supplier part number, you can actually use the where used function on the supplier part, and it will show you the OEM part that's associated to it through its AML or AVL. Similarly, if you know your part number and you're looking for the supplier part information, you can just use the AML AVL tab on your OEM part details page. Another useful function is that you can browse to a particular manufacturer and get a list of all the parts in your system that manufacturer supplies. And since all of this is linked to the database, you can click from there to any of the individual manufacturer parts and thus navigate through the AML to any of those parts as well, or the AVL for the vendor parts. So some pretty useful functions there to navigate through your parts. The second of the key additional capabilities I wanted to highlight here is some additional reporting on BOMs. There's actually been additional reports added in the Product Structure Explorer where you can incorporate your multi-level BOMs, but also show the AML and AVL in your BOMs as well. So not only can you build the BOMs that you have in your system, but you can also incorporate with those BOMs who you actually supply those parts from in one simple report, which you would see as the end result here. Here we see that there's a top-level assembly at the sort of 0th or top level, and then the first level down we have a subassembly 1 and subassembly 2. And subassembly 1 is sourced from this manufacturer right here. We only have manufacturer information for that, as well as a subassembly 2. We have some vendor information for this top assembly 1. And then at the second level down for the BOM, we have these lower parts that have manufacturer and vendor information as well. We can also see in this BOM report that the manufacturer sourcing status is a bit different as well. Some of them are approved and some of them are actually preferred for use for those particular parts, the OEM parts, that they satisfy. And finally, going through some of the administrative components, the actual administration is set up by either the organization administrators, or what the organization admins can do is add users to a group called supplier administrators and gives them the ability to get this new tab in their side browser here, which kind of looks like a factory in the on. This is actually the supplier icon. In this administrator, this is where you get access to create more suppliers or create sourcing contexts or sourcing rules for those suppliers. Anybody, however, that has the ability to make WT parts in your, like you standard have in your organization, would also have the ability to make the manufacturer parts. They just would need to have the supplier administrator or the org admin to create those actual manufacturers and vendors to associate them to. So now I'm going to switch gears here and we'll pull up our demonstration system. Just give me a moment here. Alrighty, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually go into the system and make a new manufacturer. I'm actually going to log into my Windchill system here as an organization administrator. As I had mentioned, the org admins will have the ability to do this. So at the sidebar under Browse, where we have all the administrative components, we see we've got this additional Supplier Administration tab. I can go here and go to my Suppliers tab, and we get a list of all the suppliers that exist in my organization here. So what I'm going to do is create, similar to any other wizards in Windchill, this new icon here, and here it's for new supplier. Now, one point to keep in mind is that in order to make a new supplier, an administrator first has to create what's called an organization principle ahead of time. And an organization principle is essentially just a record in your LDAP that establishes an owning identity for objects. It doesn't create a new organization container with products and libraries. It's just something to tie your vendor type or your supplier type to. So here in my wizard, I'm going to select which object type I want. Here I want to manufacture. And what's nice about this is I can either go into this search page and do a search here, or if I already know what it's called, I can start typing in what I need for my name, and I'll see it right there. So I'm going to go ahead and create my demo manufacturer from my demo manufacturer org principle. And we'll see right there, I've created my demo manufacturer type or name of manufacturer type. I can go into the details page. And from here, I can see that we have a supplier context page as well as a supplier documents page here as well. If I want, I can click on the new icon here and make some new supplier information. And I can add that to the system as well. I can also go to the supply documents, and here I can choose in the normal search page here to add a document that already exists in my Windchill system and associate that as well. Once I have my manufacturer set, at this point I have the ability to make manufacturer parts. So I'm going to log in again as my regular user. And I'm going to go ahead and make a new manufacturer part and associate it to that manufacturer that I've already existed. So I'm going to go to my supplier parts library here that I've created for this purpose. And creating new vendor parts is part of the same wizard as the regular new part wizard. So I would just launch the new part wizard. And here I have additional types to select here. We see manufacturer part and vendor part. So I want to make a new manufacturer part. And the first thing I need to do is put in what my manufacturer is. I had created the demo manufacturer, so I'm going to put that in here. I'm also going to put in this system, I have number and name as typable fields. So I'm just going to put in some information here. And again, if I chose to do so, I could add more attributes here as well and do any of the same functionality that the regular WT parts do. So I'll finish that. And now I have my manufacturer part right here. If I go into the detailed page of this part, I see the same type of information that I see in any other part details page. The last thing I want to show here regarding the actual parts is to take this manufacturer part and associate it to an OEM part through the AML AVL function. So out of the box, the AML and AVL administration and addability is actually limited to the organization administrators. So I'm going to switch back over to my org admin, and I'm going to locate an OEM part that's in my system. This demo OEM part here will work for what I need. And we'll notice I have this AML AVL tab here as well. So I'm going to click there, and I have this wizard here where I can either create new manufacturer vendor parts on the fly and associate them, or in my case, I want to add existing manufacturer parts to this AML. So I'll click this button here, and in the AML wizard, I'll actually have the ability to do both the manufacturer part and vendor part if that exists. So here, I'm going to search for my manufacturer part. There's the manufacturer part that was made by the B Sindelar name. So I'll add the part there, and then I'll also set my sourcing status. We'll say that this manufacturer part is approved for use. I can also go, and if I have one, I can select a vendor part as well. And the vendor part wizard is just a little bit different, but here I can add my vendor part. I get another search page here. And I do have a demo vendor part that I'm going to associate. And then here, I do also want to update my sourcing status, which I can do with this button here, modify the vendor part sourcing status. And I'll change that to approved as well. Once everything looks good, I can then simply hit finish. And my AML AVL record gets created here. Now that I have this record created, what I have the ability to do is navigate between all three of these parts based upon this AVL AML linkage. So from the OEM part, I see both of these parts in the tab. But if I choose to do so, I could go to either one of these parts, and if I started here in the Where Used tab, I'll actually see there's an AML AVL Where Used. I can go straight back to my OEM part. So it's a nice little associativity there that kind of takes me back and forth. The last thing I want to show before we get into the questions and answers is where the search functions and the report functions that I talked about in the slide deck are. So if I, as the org admin, again, if I go to my suppliers list, I can go and navigate to any particular supplier that's in my system. Let's say supplier 5 here, or manufacturer 5. Not only do I have details about this manufacturer, as you've seen before, but I can go to the supplied parts tab, and this will tell me every single part that's made by this supplier. And from there, I can do the same thing, where I go navigate to that particular part, and then if it has an OEM part that is used, I can then navigate to my business object, my company's business object, and pull up. This one has a bigger AML AVL, but I can pull up all the different objects that we source for this object as well. So just in a few clicks, maybe that took, what, 3 clicks from knowing just the manufacturer, I navigated to a specific part and actually found every manufacturer that supplies a part for it, and whether we use it, prefer it, or do not use it for this particular part. So pretty cool stuff there. And then finally, I'm going to go back to that assembly I navigated to or shown in the slide deck, this top assembly here. And in my top assembly, we see, again, I have a vendor part here as well. But if I go to my structure tab, I can pull up the full structure of my assembly. And here I see just my OEM parts, but I can pull in a report that shows me not only the OEM parts, but also the AMLs and AVLs that are associated as well. So granted, this is a very small assembly to use as an example, but you can see how this will extend to bigger AML AVL lists to particular parts and create a very, very useful report. So I'm going to go through and take a look at some of the chat questions here. So one of the questions is regarding master data within vendor master data to meet requirements within Windchill. One thing you can do here, and maybe I'll show this using the org admin, if you do have additional attributes that need to be applied to the vendor, as I'd mentioned before, the actual vendor and manufacturer is similar as an object type as is to any WT document, WT part, things like that. So if you had particular information you needed to track on all of your vendors and all of your manufacturers, you have the ability to add that information to the supplier soft type that you need to do that to, as you can see here. So this object type is fully extendable in that regard. I thought we had another question come up in the chat. Let me see if I pull that up. Yes, there was another question regarding if common vendors can be made at the site level, and this would be, I guess, would be going across different organization contexts. Basically, the way that the objects are set up, the idea is that since the manufacturer and the vendor exist as an object type, that object type does get stored within an owning organization context overall. So the idea here is that a vendor or a manufacturer would be owned by a particular organization. That being said, it's something to definitely look into to see if there's a way to share that information across organization contexts or supply that at the site level and be able to use that going forward. So that's something that can be addressed and extended as well. So I do want to switch back my presenter status here. Just give me one moment. I have one more slide at the end here. Just some final comments. So just a few final thoughts. We highly recommend that you go through a change and configuration management exercise to make sure that you're getting the most out of the basics of PDM-Link and the core functionality that PDM-Link supplies before you delve into how the Suma object types would factor in as well. This will make sure you get the most out of the Suma module as well. We also recommend that Suma and PartsLink modules, while they do not have to be used together, you get additional functionality out of both modules if they do both exist, because you can tie in, as I had mentioned, you can tie in sourcing contexts to classification nodes within PartsLink and really utilize that to its full potential. Eccellent Solutions has a lot of expertise in Suma implementation, including not only the setup and configuration of your strategy, but being able to actually bulk create supplier parts and AML AVL objects as well, to really go from having nothing configured in the system to setting up the system for data and then bulk loading the data in. So that concludes the demonstration. We have been recording this session. We will be posting it on our website at www.eccellent.com. Again, my name is Bob Sindelar, so if you have any other questions, feel free to send me an email or take a look at our website, and have a great day.